Yo guys, welcome back to another video. OP10 just came out over here in the East and it's already looking like a kind of spicy, fun, really cool meta, and we're going to do a little prediction tier list here. As always, these are just my opinions. Take everything with a grain of salt. This set literally dropped this past weekend, so we have not had much time with it. So I have not been able to see how everything works. I have not had that much time to kind of test and play all the new leaders and everything leading up to the release of OP10. So part of this I'm kind of just going in blind. Part of this is just me making speculations, and it's just fun, right? We're just having some fun, making some predictions as to what we think will happen, how things will shake up in OP10. But without any further ado, let's just jump in and let's get started. All right, so let's jump in. Let's get started. So let me go over the tiers really quickly. We got 1, 1.5, 2, 3. All of our leaders, the OP10 leaders. Spice Rogue category for Fallen Heroes. Shout out. These are obviously the two band leaders. And the tier 1 is essentially like contenders for best deck and format, the top of the top. 1.5, probably 1.5 is what you're going to see kind of like top 16 at most like big regionals and stuff. 2 is probably like a little bit lower. Maybe they hop on in into top 16 sometimes. 3 is kind of just like, you know, might win some flagships or something over here, like a store treasure cup for you guys in the West. And, you know, might be able to slap some people at locals, but probably not doing super well at like the big tournaments. So that's how it's set up. I already have some leaders kind of just thrown in at Spice Rogue. I think a lot of these leaders have potential, but they are just, you know, maybe it depends on the meta, or they just need a little bit more, or they have like really good matchups into certain top tier decks, but not enough for everything else. So they're just going to stay down here. If one of your decks is in here, actually, I'm going to put Marco up here. I think Marco might be a little bit, the Spice Rogue doesn't mean they're below 3. It just means that like I don't know where to place them essentially. So kind of like keep it with that in mind. Let's start out here. Let it start. I guess we can just go in order. I'm going to put Shanks in tier 1. I think Shanks was ended in tier 1 for me in OP9. I think he's going to start OP10 in tier 1. And I kind of want to preface this by saying like, this is kind of how I see the first couple of weeks of OP10 going. I don't think this is like how OP10 will end by any means. Again, these are just my predictions, and this is more so to just kind of see how we think the meta will start shaking up at the beginning of the format. So I do want to make that very clear before we even like jump into everything here. But Shanks is really strong. He got some new buffs with the Divine Departure event, which I think is actually gonna kind of just like be a new tech that kind of just helps him out in a lot of matchups. Like even small things that you might not think about, like Teach, it just makes him even stronger against Bonnie in my opinion, because he has another way to get rid of Hawkins and stuff like that. Just ways to pop characters against like Ploofy, and yeah, it's gonna be, you probably are gonna have to stop running Red Hawk in order to play that, but at the end of the day it might just be stronger anyways. Lim, we're gonna put Lim in tier 2 for now. Lim is a sleeper. From like early testing in OP10, she has seemed very strong, and it's pretty cool. It's cool to see Lim. As much as I hate like the Odyssey cards taking up all the green slots the past 2 sets, I am glad they gave her real buffs and that she's potentially like a really viable leader. Like Lim, I don't know, dude. Like we could end up putting Lim here in 1.5. I'm not sure. I don't think she's seen the results yet for me to like really put her in 1.5, but I do think she's immediately jumped up. People are saying she has a pretty nice matchup into Blackbeard, although I do think it's like not a free win or anything like that. But yeah, just really strong, and with the right text and some of the new cards, some of the new Odyssey cards she got are really strong. And the deck is more like well built out now. It's not just like run the Odyssey cards that you have and ramp to Zoro or Kylan, right? Like you have other options now, which is really nice and something she needed, so it's good to see. BP Luffy, probably gonna put him 3. I think he's still just lacking a little bit something. He didn't really get any buffs, and I know a lot of people were thinking that the new starter deck was going to be like black or purple, which I did too, but it's going to be red. So no new support for Luffy just yet. He's going to stay here. Buggy, I think just because Buggy has a decent matchup into DOFFY, and I consider him to have a decent matchup into Blackbeard as well. I think he can be at tier 3. I think to most of the other decks he can struggle a lot, like just loses pretty hard to Shanks. There's a lot of, and like, you know, there's just a few things where Buggy is still struggling. Teach, boy, you go up there. Yay, I put Teach in tier 1. Are you guys happy? Yay. no more comments about why Teach isn't in tier 1, okay? I don't want to hear it. I do think Teach goes into tier 1 though, for real this time. For anyone who's wondering, I put Teach at the very top of tier 1.5 in my OP9 prediction tier list for the West. And a lot of people were just not happy with that, which I think is really funny. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I even said like he could be tier 1. It just depends on a few things. But yeah, I think he's tier 1 now. I do think he's tier 1. The new 5-cost Kuzan card is the first step, the first nice little step in the possibly short or possibly long journey into getting Blackbeard to becoming the next band leader. So we'll see how that goes. But for now, I do think he has enough natural enemies. Like, honestly, I think Shanks, if you're running the right build, is pretty 50-50. You lose hard to DOFFY. Probably not as hard anymore in OP10 with new cards like Liberation. But the thing is, you can't just run Liberation at 4. Like, it's not that strong into every single matchup, and the slots that you have for Blackbeard are already getting pretty slim as is. So adding in another card like 5-cost Kuzan, which is counterless, just like is making it harder for Blackbeard to build their decks, which is great. We love to see that, because what that does is normally means that it allows other decks that might have had a more unfavored matchup to now become closer to 50-50 or even favored, which I think just helps balance the meta out. But I do think he's super duper strong. He's a really hard deck to play. I mean, shout out to all the people playing Blackbeard. That deck is so hard. It's really underrated in how hard it is to actually play, and you have to really know how to play against it as well. But I do think it's a deck that's kind of like Nami. It's kind of like a Nell. There's a huge knowledge gap, and if your opponent has crossed over that knowledge gap, I do think it's not as scary as people might think it is. And I do think there are ways to beat this deck just based on like how you play and how you build out your own deck. But he's really, really strong. He's going to tier 1. Let's move on. Nami. I'll put Nami in tier 3 for now. She still has a rough matchup into DOFFY and Teach. Beats the living daylights out of Shanks. I mean, it's pretty favored against Shanks if you ask me. But just because like now that 2 of her worst matchups are going to be tier 1, spoiler alert, DOFFY is still tier 1. I'm going to have to put her down at tier 3, but she is really strong still. She's going to be tier 3 for me. DOFFY, the old Doofster, I'm going to put him at tier 1 here. I think if you ask me, you could probably do this, but honestly, I think Shanks has a decent enough matchup into a lot of the new leaders and a lot of just like the old top leaders as well, to the point where I think Shanks is just number 2 for the first like couple weeks. I think DOFFY's number 1, possibly throughout the whole meta, to be honest. Shanks is number 2 for the first couple of weeks, and Blackbeard is number 3. Blackbeard could become number 2 if people kind of, the thing is like it's hard to tech for Shanks. It's like either your deck is good against it or it's not. It's rare that you have a card like 9-cost Shanks in Bonnie or Green that you can just run and it like really helps even out the matchup. But yeah, he's just generically really strong, and I think with the Kamosari, the new Divine Departure event, it's going to be allow him to even tech for like even more types of matchups. But yeah, DOFFY's going up here. I think he's still just the strongest, still gets the most value, still just a really, really consistent and high resource, high value aggro deck that is hard to beat, as you might have been able to tell with Red Purple Law. Do I think he's as strong as Sakazuki or Red Purple Law? No way. He's not that strong. There is no tier 0 deck in this format, in my opinion, but DOFFY is probably the best. I'm just going to say that right now. Vegapunk, my old guy, my old G-chan. He's, I don't know, this is kind of hard. He has a decent matchup into like still a winning matchup into Doflamingo. I think he's really good in Teach if you run the aggro version. Shanks I think can be pretty difficult, especially if they still run stuff like Lucky Roo, and maybe even with the new event too, kind of just like being able to get rid of your bodies with in different ways might be kind of hard. I could put him in tier 2 for now. I still think he has a decent matchup into a lot of the top tier decks, but I think he actually struggle into some of these other new leaders, especially like anything that has blue. I mean, like Usopp could be hard for him. Smoker might even be hard for him. Law might even be able to out aggro him. Lim is kind of doing the same thing, but like if Lim ramps to Zoro and just puts Zoro on the board, but I think Vegapunk dies. There's not much you can really do there. So he may even go down to 3, but we'll leave him at tier 2 for now. Katakuri, spicy little boy. I think he got some buffs with Robin and Akos Kid, and I think people are just gonna make good stuff Katakuri, and wouldn't you know it, triggers are strong, Katakuri is strong, 10 cost mom is still as annoying as she was in the past, and Katakuri is a pretty strong leader, so I'm gonna put him at tier 2. I don't think he's anything amazing though. Actually, hold on. I think we're gonna have to do this. I think I need a reserve 2 for like a little bit stronger. Katakuri could honestly go up to 2 though, so we'll see. Green Purple Doflamingo, I wanted to give him a shout out because he got so many buffs. I think he's going to be a pretty decent tier 3 leader. I don't know how strong he's actually going to end up being, and I don't know how well his matchups are actually into these top 3. So that's kind of what we have to start basing things around. So because I'm not sure, I'm going to keep him in tier 3. Rebecca, I think has, I think maybe I need to just do these two together. So Rebecca and Usopp, one of them is probably going to be stronger than the other just in this format. And I am going to kind of just group them together. Sorry if you don't like that, but I'm kind of just counting them as the same thing here. I think they have potential to be tier 1.5, not tier 1. I think I'm just going to spoil it now. I think these are the only 3 techs in tier 1. Tier 1.5, I could see Usopp or Rebecca kind of like claiming that title. Just like, it depends on how well they can kind of play into Doffy and Teach, right? And obviously Shanks, but I think this still needs a little bit more testing. I've heard mixed results from friends, from people that I've seen online, from YouTube videos that I've been watching of people testing and everything. I've heard Rebecca stomps Teach. I've heard Rebecca dies to Teach. I've heard recently Usopp seems to be doing pretty well into Teach, but can struggle against stuff like Shanks, and I'm not exactly sure about the Doffy matchup. So again, a lot of these are just me guessing. I'm trying as hard as I can to try out as many of the leaders. I've been playing Smoker, Law, and Kid, just to give you an idea of what I have personal experience with. But I'm not a big black player, and I'm not a blue player at all, so I don't have as much experience with these, but the potential here is really, really strong. That's all I kind of want to say, right? Pluffy, oh man. Does Pluffy go into tier 1? No, Pluffy stays in tier 1.5 for me, just because he still has that weird problem where if you don't go first, you suddenly lose so much value from your own deck, which I think is just a crutch that is not good enough to put you at tier 1 in this moment, right? I do think he has a decent matchup into Teach. It's probably about 50-50 with Shanks, and then maybe 50-50 slightly unfavored into Doffy, right? So, but just generically still a really, really strong deck. I think he needs to be at 1.5, but who knows? It could end up like something like this. We'll see what happens. Enel, I think Enel is such a leader that's super dependent on the rest of the meta. So like, obviously has a great matchup into Doffy. Teach is terrible. Shanks, it kind of just depends on their build as well, and like how good the Enel player is and how well they know the matchup. Terrible matchup into Pluffy, and I can't see it being too amazing into Rebecca or Usopp, so I'm actually going to put him down to tier 3. I think he just loses to Lim as well. So if Lim actually stays up here, Lim is going to be like the sub tier like gatekeeper deck, which could be hilarious. Bonnie, definitely at least tier 2, could go up to tier 1.5. I think here's the thing, Bonnie is another deck that's going to depend, like Bonnie is always tier 2 or tier 1.5 in my opinion, right? She was like tier 1 for a couple weeks in OP9 when Pluffy and Doffy were the top tier decks. But you have like 50-50 / winning into Doffy. Shanks slightly unfavored, but if you run 4 9-cost Shanks and you just know the matchup, it's only just slightly unfavored. And I think Teach is slightly unfavored or even 50-50, just depending on your own build and how well you know the matchup as well. I have been playing a ton of Bonnie in 09, and I am not just saying this, like, it's not just copium, I promise you, like, Shanks is definitely unfavored, but the amount you make it slightly unfavored to close to 50-50 is entirely dependent on you, your build, and how well you know the matchup. Blackbeard, honestly, Shanks is harder than Blackbeard. I would say Blackbeard is really, really close to 50-50. You just need to know how to play the matchup. And then you have a slightly winning matchup against Doffy, especially if you're running 8-cost Kid. So, I mean, that's pretty good. That's like a decent matchup spread into the top tier 1 decks, right? Do I think she's tier 1? No, I'm not going to try and say that. But I do think she deserves a spot at the end of tier 1.5 just because she's kind of like an outlier where like probably in a regional It's really going to depend, and we'll talk about this too because I think Lucci comes into the equation as well, but I think she's really strong. I'm going to keep her up here. Hancock is kind of like, I would put her in Spice Rogue, but she's been kind of showing up. I think she could go into tier 2 just because she has an amazing matchup into Blackbeard. She can kind of handle Shanks, and has an okay matchup into Doflamingo, right? So I think she can go here. I'm not sure. Ploofy seems to be like iffy. It just depends on how many gravity blades he can draw. And then Rebecca Usopp, I'm not really sure. Foxy is going to go in tier 3 just because he has a good matchup into Teach and Doffy, but struggles into a lot of the other leaders. Lucci, we need to talk about Lucci. So I was thinking this a while ago too, like kind of just when I was first thinking about this tier list. And I've been talking to some friends recently too as well. And unfortunately for all my homies that hate Lucci, including me, I think he might be pretty strong. He has a shot of being really powerful in OP10, and it's just because he has like a decent matchup into Doffy. It's close to 50-50. Shanks I think is about 50-50 because now that everyone runs 5-cost Ace, a lot of people run Marco, and honestly Red Hawk is good against Lucci as well. Blackbeard, obviously a terrible matchup, but it's kind of like Bonnie, where it's like if your deck is teched, you have the 9-cost Kaido and you know the matchup, it's actually not as impossible as a lot of people think it is. And then historically, Lucci has been really good into stuff like Rebecca, so I don't know about Usopp. I honestly don't know, so we'll see. And then obviously Ploofy is just dice roll. If you steal first from them, then you're like probably slightly favored. If they go first, you're probably slightly unfavored. And then you have a favored matchup into Bonnie. So I'm going to put him here for now. He could be a little bit of a sleeper. So if you're a Lucci fan, I guess be happy because OP10, he's probably going to be a little bit more viable than he was in OP9. Red Purple Luffy, I think, just struggles really hard into stuff like Blackbeard, unless your deck is completely teched for him. But if you're completely teched for Blackbeard, I don't know how well you handle everything else. But the other thing is, like, RP Luffy still has a decent shot because he has a good matchup into Doffy and Shanks. So it's kind of just like how you look at it, you know. But I think he just struggles into certain other matchups and maybe lacks, like, he has consistency, but at the same time he kind of doesn't sometimes, if that makes sense. It's kind of weird, but I think he's in a little bit of a weird spot. But he could be tier 2, honestly, I'm not gonna lie. BYL, I think we're gonna put him, this is weird, this is kind of hard, like 50-50 or slightly losing against Doffy, slightly unfavored against Shanks, and then pretty unfavored against Teach, unless you're completely teched for the deck with like Raigo, or even some people running 9-cost Kaido. So it's hard for me to kind of place him in here. But if Lucci comes up, he always rises. He rises as Lucci rises, right? But then as Bonnie rises, he falls off. So I would maybe put him like right here. I don't know. I'm not sure about this right now. Smoker, I think, has a decent shot. I think we're putting a lot into 1.5, aren't we? We might need to like kind of yeah, I might have to do something like this. Smoker has a decent matchup into Teach, but I think he struggles harder into Doffy and even stuff like Shanks, where Lucci might just be the better black leader again. Whereas in OP9, for parts of it, I think Smoker ended up being the black leader, the better black leader, just because he has, with Tashigi and searchable Ice Age and stuff like that with Brand New, I think a little bit better matchup into Teach, but we'll see. Yamato, going into tier 2, let's go. My Yamato stands rise up, because as Teach rises, so does Yamato. And you know, same with like BYL. Lucci's not even the worst matchup in the world. It all just depends on your build, right? And I think there are some new builds that you can do. I guess it just depends. If Teach is like here, then Yamato's up higher, right? I mean, we could. Now the other thing too is like the more 4-life leaders that end up being at the top, like I think Yamato does well into Lim, does well into Usopp, well into Smoker, Law, maybe even Kid, and obviously just any of the 4-life leaders. So I'm gonna put Yamato there. Robin, I think, goes into tier 3. She's still really strong, has some potential there, but just not enough right now. Marco, same kind of thing. I think like, you know, people like Eggman and Vampire cooking in the West, doing a really good job with him there. So seeing some of the results and some of the hard work that's paid off with Marco kind of makes me put him in tier 3, even though he has a rough matchup. Like Shanks is kind of just the better like choice a lot of the times over Marco, but I do think Marco has potential with the blue side of him to take advantage, and like just his ability to KO things is really strong. Perona probably going to be a tier 3 here for me as well. So yeah, let's move on to the OP10 leaders besides Usopp, just because I don't want this to go on too long. Smoker, I think, is a 1.5 leader for me. I'm gonna put Smoker here. I think that's probably reasonable. Law is gonna go into tier 2, and let me just. So Smoker's, I think, really good. The ability to get the Dawn back and everything is so strong, but I think the 4 life leader thing just really ends up hurting him a bit. And even if you run ACOS Kid, I think Doffy is still a pretty tough matchup, and I think Shanks is kind of hard too. I'm not gonna lie. I don't know if you can really beat Shanks if you're just running like 9-cost Zoro and 8-cost Kid. A lot of the times you end up needing more. If it was a 5 life leader, I could see that being a little bit different, but just being a 4 life leader, I think is tough. I think, yeah, I don't know. This is actually kind of rough. I think I'm gonna put Smoker right here. Yeah, I'm gonna do that. Actually, I'm gonna do this. Okay, yeah, here we go. All right, we're cooking, we're gaming. I think Pluffy, just like this right here, I don't know enough, which is why I don't feel comfortable putting them at the top of 1.5. Let me just say that, right? Law, this leader is so much fun. So cool. The possibilities are endless, and I think it's just a matter of time before this guy literally just becomes 1.5 or even potentially tier 1 someday. Maybe with a little bit more support, or just like this leader has so many intricacies that you can use with the leader effect, where I think people are sleeping a little bit. The one thing is like undeniably has a terrible matchup into Teach. It's really hard because he relies on so many things for on plays to get the cards into his life that he can use for leader effect. Otherwise, you're just bouncing things back to your hand and just praying and just flipping your life. And if it's a 5 cost or less, like that you want to play, you can play it, right? Because if you hit a 1 cost like beige or something, there's no point in playing it, right? So yeah, it's kind of forcing people, I think, to tech and build their decks a certain way. But while I think other ways to build a deck is potentially stronger in the long run, I'm gonna try and play this leader a lot and see if I can go into it and make some videos on him for OP10 for sure. Yellow Kid is another leader I've been playing, and I think I would just generically put him over Law at the moment. He has a decent matchup. He beats Doffy, loses to Pluffy, loses to Shanks, but I think it's probably close to 50-50, and then a really hard matchup into Teach. So just for that alone, like I can't. I think probably would struggle a bit into like Lucci and Bonnie too. So I'm just gonna keep him here. Really strong though. I do think like in this current meta, I think he's probably better than Enel. I'm not gonna lie. Honestly, I'm gonna put Katakuri over Enel too. Like the ordering on these bottom rows don't matter as much, so please don't pay as much attention to them. Caesar, I mean, just because I kind of have to, right? I think I'm gonna put him here. Actually, gonna put Nami like right here. Caesar, just because he's a new leader, I'll keep him at tier 3, and because we haven't had as much time. Unfortunate, he just didn't get a lot of support. And his effect is kind of just hard to pull off and costs a lot. It's just, at the end of the day, just not that strong in my opinion. I'm sorry. But with the right support, could be pretty strong someday. Like Monet is a really good card. That new SR from OP10, it works great with Caesar, and with the right support in the right meta where there's not as much like anti-KO stuff being used, could be really strong. Sugar, in my opinion, I originally rated her like really high. I think people are just not using her as much, and I think that's part of the problem. I don't know, man. Like, I just don't see people using her as much. So I think she's similar to Law, where it's like people just haven't really like put enough time and research into her. Obviously, it's like the set just came out, right? So it's like people are still trying to figure things out, but I do think she has some nice like latent potential there, and I just think like being able to ramp while also protecting yourself by playing events just is a little bit stronger than like inherently very strong, and in some cases can be even stronger than just Lim ramping for free by playing something out for 3 Dawn, or you know, like other leaders like Pluffy has to take his own life, Lim has to top 3 Dawn. Sugar can start like ramping immediately just by playing events and stuff like that, which I think is really strong at the end of the day. Okay, that's all the leaders. Let me just go through and we can double check things and see if we would change anything here. The top 3 I'm going to keep like this. I think Pluffy just stays at the outer edge of 1.5 here. I do think Usopp and Rebecca have real potential to be like really high up here, but I'm not quite sure yet. I do think Lucci is going to be very strong. BYL, just because he's like just grandfathered into being really like high up in the meta, but does struggle into like 2 of the top tier 1 decks. Bonnie, just because I think she has a decent matchup into generically everything, and then with the right practice and deck building, you can take on the big 3 right here. but it's not for everyone, and it's hard to get there, right? Lim, you know what, dude? Lim's going in 1.5. I think we're gonna do this. I think we're gonna put Lim in 1.5. Give me 1 sec real quick. All right, is this crazy? Would you call me crazy? Would you call me crazy if I did this? So Usopp and Rebecca are getting counted as 1. It's whichever one ends up being stronger, right? Then Lim right here. Yeah, okay. All right, so I think this is it. We made a last minute audible to put Lim up in 1.5, but this is how I see it. If you just skipped here to the end of the video, let me just quickly give you a quick rundown. We got the top 3 here, which I think just doesn't change. Floofy kind of edging out at 1.5 here. Usopp and Rebecca I'm counting as 1. Whichever one is stronger, right, is gonna be that spot there in my mind. Lim I think is just a slightly sleeper pick that does really well into stuff like Teach and has potential to do well into other decks too, but it's still yet to be seen. Smoker I think is really strong, but struggles from being 4 life and not being able to answer decks like Shanks and DOFFY well enough. And then Lucci I think is just going to be able to take advantage of some of these other decks that have climbed up to the top. So he's kind of back in the mix in my mind. BYL, not much to say there, just really strong, you know, just always generically strong. And then Bonnie, because she does well into the top 3 and generically well into a lot of these other decks, gonna put her here. And then, you know, you got the ones with potential that have kind of shown up recently. Yellow Green Law, I think if Teach didn't exist, I think Yellow Green Law would be a lot higher, but Yellow Kid, same thing, just bad matchups into too many top tier decks for me. Sugar I think is a little bit unexplored. Hancock Spice, Yamato's got some chance, and then these are all the tier 3 leaders. So that's gonna be it. These are my thoughts. I mean, honestly, if I did this tier list again tomorrow, I'm sure everything would change. So please, as always, I know I keep saying this, but take it all with a grain of salt. These are just my predictions. I'm really not sure about this tier 1.5 part. Like, some of these leaders should probably be in tier 2, but I just see the potential is there. And so for now, because this is just how I see things going in the first couple weeks of OP10, I'm going to keep it like this. So just consider it like like you could even change the order. Let me know what you would personally change, if you've tested any of these OP10 leaders, because that'll obviously like help your case. Are you happy I finally put Blackbeard in tier 1? Are you sad because I still put Shanks above him? Are you mad at me? Did I do the wrong thing again? Let me know down in the comments. But as always, just honestly, like, all joking aside, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.